When Ethan Miller bought his new piece of land, he wasn't looking for drama. After years of saving, he had finally found the perfect spot, 2 quiet acres on the edge of a small suburban development. The property bordered a neatly organized neighborhood managed by a notoriously strict homeowners association, but Ethan's lot, as confirmed by the county records, sat just outside their jurisdiction. He liked that detail. He wanted privacy, space, and freedom to build his dream home without dealing with HOA rules about mailbox colors and lawn lengths. The trouble started 3 days after the moving truck arrived. The first few days were peaceful. Ethan had cleared brush, set up a temporary RV to live in while construction plans were finalized, and spent his evenings sitting under the wide oak tree that overlooked the neighborhood road. He noticed the same white SUV drive by several times, always slowing down near his lot before speeding off again. He thought nothing of it at first, until the SUV stopped completely one morning. Out stepped a woman dressed in pressed slacks, a pastel blouse, and the unmistakable confidence of someone used to being obeyed. She took photos of Ethan's RV, wrote something on a clipboard, and then left without a word. Later that day, a printed notice appeared taped to a stake at the edge of his gravel driveway. It was a violation warning. According to the notice, Ethan was in violation of community bylaws regarding temporary structures and exterior property maintenance. It threatened daily fines and possible legal action if he didn't remove all unapproved dwellings. At first, Ethan laughed. This had to be a mistake. He wasn't part of their HOA. He had made sure of that. His title documents, tax map, and deed clearly stated that his property wasn't under any covenant or association. But the notice had the official HOA letterhead with the name Silver Creek Estates, printed across the top and signed at the bottom by the HOA president, Karen Whitmore. Ethan decided to let it go for the night. Maybe it was just confusion. Maybe they hadn't realized his property line wasn't included. The next day, the same SUV returned. Karen got out again, this time pacing along the edge of his driveway, camera in hand. She took more pictures, measuring something on the ground with a small tape measure. Ethan watched quietly from inside his RV, both annoyed and amused. Over the next week, the visits escalated. Every couple of days, another violation notice would appear. Warnings about weeds, trash, and even unauthorized structures visible from the street. Karen began walking her dog past his lot daily, always stopping to glare at the construction equipment. Once, Ethan saw her pointing toward his property while talking to 2 other HOA board members. They nodded, their faces serious like they were discussing a criminal operation. Then came the letter. A formal envelope hand-delivered, demanding that Ethan cease construction activities and attend an HOA disciplinary meeting. It even included a fine amount, $500 for multiple ongoing infractions. The arrogance made him laugh out loud. He drafted a short, polite response and left it taped to the stake where she had posted the notices. Dear HOA Board, this property is not part of Silver Creek Estates. Please check county parcel maps for confirmation. Any further trespassing or harassment will be reported to the sheriff's department. Thank you. He thought that would be the end of it. But for someone like Karen Whitmore, being wrong wasn't an option. That weekend, Ethan heard the distant rumble of a small meeting happening just beyond his driveway. When he peeked outside, he saw a group of residents gathered near the entrance of Silver Creek Estates, Karen in the center waving papers around. They were clearly discussing him. Her voice carried across the quiet street, sharp and indignant, filled with words like eyesore, property values, and non-compliant structures. It didn't matter to her that his land was legally separate. In her mind, his presence was an intrusion on her perfect little community. A few days later, Ethan woke to find a bright orange sticker plastered on his RV door. It read, Notice of Eviction. Below that, someone had scrawled in pen, You don't belong here. That crossed the line. He took photos, documented everything, and drove to the county zoning office. The clerk confirmed again that his lot was not, and never had been, part of Silver Creek Estates. The clerk even showed him the official map with the thick black line marking the HOA boundary, a line that stopped 20 feet short of Ethan's property. Armed with paperwork, Ethan returned home ready to confront the harassment once and for all. But Karen had already escalated. When he pulled into his gravel driveway, two uniformed officers were standing near his RV. Their squad car lights were flashing, and Karen was there too, arms crossed, face smug, watching from behind them. Apparently, she had called the police to report an illegal squatter on HOA property. Ethan's heart sank, but only for a moment. He knew he had everything he needed to prove her wrong. The officers listened as both sides explained their story. Karen spoke with absolute confidence, waving her stack of violation notices like they were official court orders. But when Ethan handed over his deed and the county map, the tone changed quickly. The officers checked the documents, made a few calls, and then turned to Karen. Their words carried across the quiet street. "Ma'am, this property isn't part of your HOA. He's within his rights to be here." Karen's face flushed red. She argued, insisted, even accused Ethan of forging documents. The officers warned her to leave his property and not return without cause. Reluctantly, she stormed back to her SUV, muttering under her breath about people who think they're above community standards. Ethan thought that would be the end of it. But as her car disappeared around the corner, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. People like Karen didn't accept defeat quietly. That night he noticed something unsettling. As the sun went down, headlights flashed across his lot again and again. Someone kept driving past slowly, stopping at the edge of his driveway before rolling away. The same white SUV circling like a vulture. Ethan turned off his lights and stood by the window watching. Karen wasn't done with him yet. And by the time morning came, she would find a new way to strike back. One that would drag the entire neighborhood into a boundary war no one saw coming. The next morning began with silence, the kind that feels heavy and uncertain. Ethan stepped outside, coffee mug in hand, and immediately noticed the change. Along the edge of his property, a brand new row of bright yellow stakes had appeared overnight. They stood in a perfect line, cutting across the gravel, slicing through the area where he had parked his trailer. Attached to several of the stakes were laminated signs that read, "HOA property, no trespassing." Ethan's stomach tightened. He hadn't authorized anything like this, and he knew exactly who had. It was pure Karen. The absurdity almost made him laugh. She had apparently marked what she believed was the true boundary of the HOA, completely ignoring the official maps. It wasn't just harassment now. It was an attempt to rewrite property lines by force of personality. By mid-morning, Ethan spotted her again, clipboard in hand, pacing up and down the road with two other board members in tow. They nodded along as she pointed toward his trailer and spoke with animated gestures. From their expressions, it was clear they believed her version of events. Karen's word carried weight in Silver Creek Estates. She'd been the HOA president for nearly a decade and had built her reputation on controlling every inch of the neighborhood, from mailbox paint shades to the types of flowers allowed in front gardens. Now she wanted to control him too. When Ethan removed the stakes later that day, he heard her SUV tires screech to a halt behind him. She didn't approach this time, but she sat in her car with her phone held high, recording every move he made. Within hours, several more stakes reappeared, this time hammered deeper into the ground. It became a game of escalation. He'd take them out. She'd put them back. He'd clean up the mess. She'd arrive the next morning with 2 HOA volunteers and drive new ones in. Soon, small groups of neighbors began gathering at the edge of the street, watching. Some shook their heads, whispering. Others filmed with their phones. To them, Ethan was the troublemaker. Karen had already sent out a community-wide email warning about an unauthorized occupant threatening HOA property values. The rumor spread quickly that a squatter had moved in, refusing to follow rules. In a matter of days, Ethan went from invisible to infamous. Then came the next step in Karen's plan, a construction stop order. He found the red notice taped to the hood of his pickup truck one morning, printed with the same HOA letterhead. It ordered immediate cessation of unapproved land development and threatened legal consequences under community bylaws. But the kicker was at the bottom, a signature from someone pretending to be the county inspector. That crossed into criminal territory. Ethan drove straight to the county office again. The clerk there shook her head in disbelief. The document was fake. The county hadn't issued any stop order. The signature belonged to no one in their department. They advised him to file a formal harassment report with the sheriff, and this time, he did. 2 deputies came out later that afternoon. They walked the property line with him, reviewed the fake documents, and confirmed the obvious. Karen had no jurisdiction beyond the HOA boundary. They left her a warning to cease all attempts to interfere with his property. But as they drove away, Ethan saw her standing at the end of the cul-de-sac again, staring. No phone. No clipboard. Just that cold, simmering look of someone who wasn't finished losing. For a few days, things quieted down. The white SUV stopped circling. The violation notices stopped appearing. Ethan even managed to get back to planning the foundation work for his small home. He started to believe maybe she'd finally accepted the truth. Then one night, just after midnight, the dog started barking. He stepped outside with a flashlight, sweeping the beam across the yard. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the light caught something near the oak tree, a large wooden fence post sticking upright in freshly dug soil. Ethan followed the line of posts, realizing Karen had started building a fence. Not on her side of the property, but well across the boundary, straight through the middle of his land. By morning, half a dozen HOA members were out there with her, hammering nails, carrying planks, and following her orders like soldiers. They were building a barrier, one that would effectively cut off his driveway from the main road. Ethan called the sheriff immediately. The deputies arrived within the hour, and once again they ordered Karen to stop construction and remove the materials. She argued, as always, claiming the maps were wrong and that the HOA had decided to reclaim the area. The deputies reminded her that she had no legal authority to reclaim anything and threatened charges if she continued. She backed off that day, but she didn't take down the posts. For weeks, the tension simmered. The fence line sat half-built, a silent symbol of defiance. Ethan could feel the neighborhood watching him every time he drove by. He caught people taking photos, whispering to one another, even pointing at his truck. Then came the letter that changed everything. It was from Karen's personal attorney, written on official letterhead. The HOA, the letter claimed, was asserting ownership over a portion of Ethan's property based on historic boundary understanding and community easement rights. They demanded he remove all structures within 30 days or face a civil suit. Ethan laughed bitterly when he read it, but inside he knew things were about to get serious. A real lawsuit meant real expenses, time, and stress. And while he knew the HOA didn't have a case, they could still drag him into months of legal headaches. So Ethan hired a lawyer of his own, a quiet, methodical man named Grant who specialized in property disputes. Within a week, Grant had filed a counterclaim and submitted a request for a formal survey. The surveyor's report arrived a few weeks later, confirming exactly what Ethan had known all along. His property was entirely outside the HOA. The fence, the stakes, and the signs were all well within his boundary. Grant sent a copy of the report to both Karen and the county records office. It should have been the final nail in the coffin. But for Karen, losing on paper wasn't the same as losing in her mind. The next evening, Ethan came home to find something shocking. His RV windows were shattered. Spray painted across the side of the trailer, in thick black letters, were 3 words that made his chest tighten. HOA wins again. He stood there in the fading daylight, staring at the damage, realizing this had gone far beyond property lines now. This wasn't about land anymore. It was about control, about a woman who couldn't accept boundaries, legal or personal. And as the sheriff's car pulled up once again, lights flashing in the dark, Ethan knew this war with Karen was far from over. Because next, she wasn't going to use fake notices or fences. She was going to use the one weapon she thought could finally drive him out for good, the law itself. The morning after the vandalism, Ethan's property was a crime scene. The sheriff's deputies documented everything, the shattered windows, the spray paint, the footprints in the dirt leading back toward the street. The evidence pointed in one direction, but without a witness, it wasn't enough to press charges. Karen stood at the end of her cul-de-sac again, watching the officers with her arms folded. When their eyes met, she smiled, a slow, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. It wasn't a smile of friendliness. It was victory, the kind that came from knowing how to twist a system to her will. Within days, the HOA's attorney filed a lawsuit. The complaint accused Ethan of trespassing on HOA land, violating community harmony, and creating a public nuisance. It demanded not only that he vacate his property, but also pay for the cost of remediation and aesthetic restoration. Ethan could barely believe what he was reading. Every word was false, but the document was real enough to pull him into court. His attorney, Grant, explained it plainly. Even a frivolous suit can drain time and money. "She's betting you'll give up," he said. Giving up wasn't an option. The first court hearing took place 2 months later inside the county courthouse, a clean, echoing space that smelled faintly of polished wood and tension. On one side of the room sat Ethan, calm but tired. On the other sat Karen and 2 board members, dressed as though attending a gala, flipping through binders of neatly labeled evidence. They looked confident, even smug. Karen's lawyer opened the argument with a performance. He spoke about community integrity, declining property values, and the defendant's blatant disregard for HOA regulations. He painted Ethan as a reckless squatter building illegally on association land. When it was Grant's turn, he didn't bother with theatrics. He simply handed the judge the official survey report, the county parcel map, and a copy of the deed showing Ethan's property lay entirely outside the HOA boundary. The courtroom fell silent as the judge reviewed the paperwork. The law was clear. The HOA had no jurisdiction and no standing. Then slowly the judge looked up and said exactly what Ethan had been waiting months to hear. "This case is dismissed." Karen's face turned white. Her lawyer tried to object, claiming new evidence would be presented, but the judge cut him off. The matter was settled. The HOA's lawsuit was not only dismissed, it was flagged as baseless. Ethan left the courtroom with relief washing over him like sunlight after a storm. It was over, he thought. Finally, it was over. But Karen wasn't finished. The next week, HOA newsletters began circulating through Silver Creek Estates. Every resident received a copy, complete with photos of Ethan's property and bold captions like, "Eyesore neighbor still refuses to leave," and "County's confusing decision threatens community order." She'd lost in court, but she was waging a new kind of war, one of reputation. Neighbors who used to wave stopped making eye contact. A few even crossed the street when they saw Ethan's truck. The gossip spread like wildfire. Karen made sure of it. Soon, Ethan's property became the talk of local Facebook groups. Posts accused him of all sorts of nonsense, illegal dumping, unlicensed building, even running a business from home. None of it was true, but the noise built pressure. Then, late one afternoon, a county code enforcement truck pulled into his driveway. The officer explained they'd received multiple anonymous complaints about unpermitted construction and safety violations. Ethan showed him the permits, the same ones he'd filed weeks earlier. The officer nodded politely, checked the documents, and confirmed everything was in order. But before leaving, he sighed. "You've got someone with an agenda here," he said quietly. Ethan already knew who. The harassment returned in small, relentless ways. Karen's volunteers planted HOA signage closer and closer to his property line. HOA drones flew overhead, capturing community footage that somehow always included his lot. Then, one night, someone dumped a pile of lawn clippings and garbage right across his driveway entrance. Ethan kept documenting everything, photos, dates, reports. Grant advised him to stay calm, not retaliate, and let the evidence build. "Bullies always go too far," he said. "When she does, we'll make it count." And she did. A month later, Karen organized what she called a community cleanup initiative. On paper, it was just a neighborhood event. In practice, it was an invasion. Dozens of HOA residents showed up with trash bags, rakes, and trucks. They swept through the boundary like it didn't exist, cutting down brush on Ethan's side, hauling away old fencing materials, even tearing up the gravel near his driveway. Ethan returned from town to find a dozen people standing on his property, cleaning what wasn't theirs. Karen stood at the center, directing them like a foreman. When he approached, the crowd scattered, pretending they hadn't realized they'd crossed over. Karen stayed, smiling that same tight smile. She said nothing. She didn't have to. The damage spoke for her. Ethan's lawyer filed a formal complaint the next day. This time it was serious. Criminal trespass and property destruction. Deputies served Karen with a notice of investigation. For the first time, the power dynamic shifted. The neighborhood that had once backed her began to fracture. Some residents quietly reached out to Ethan, apologizing for the rumors. They'd seen too much. Karen's obsession was making everyone uncomfortable. Still, she doubled down. She started showing up at county meetings, arguing that the HOA's borders had been misdrawn years ago, and that Ethan's land should rightfully be part of Silver Creek Estates. Officials grew tired of seeing her name on the agenda. Each time they told her the same thing. The maps were correct. The boundary line wasn't changing. Every denial made her angrier, and anger turned into recklessness. Late one night, Ethan heard engines rumbling outside again. He looked out the window and saw headlights moving across his property, slow, deliberate. When he stepped outside, he caught sight of a pickup truck speeding off toward the subdivision. In the morning, he discovered fresh tire ruts carved into the soft earth and another spray-painted message across his shed. "Get out while you can." That was the breaking point. Ethan turned over every photo, every video, every document to the sheriff's department and the district attorney. His lawyer filed both a restraining order and a civil suit against Karen personally for harassment, defamation, and property damage. When the deputies served her with the restraining order, witnesses said her face went pale. For the first time, she didn't have a ready comeback or a confident smile. The HOA board held an emergency meeting days later. Word spread quickly that some members wanted her removed from her position as president. She'd brought chaos, legal trouble, and embarrassment to their quiet community. Karen fought to keep control, insisting Ethan had manipulated the system. But the tide had turned. Her authority, once absolute, was cracking. And yet, even as the walls closed in, she refused to stop. Because in her mind, it wasn't about land or rules anymore. It was about pride. About proving she was right, even if she had to destroy herself to do it. By the time fall arrived, the neighborhood of Silver Creek Estates would never be the same again. And as Ethan watched the first leaves drift across the empty fence line, he had no idea that Karen's final act of defiance was still coming. One that would end the battle in a way no one expected. Autumn came quietly to Silver Creek Estates. The manicured lawns turned brittle and brown, the flower beds wilted, and the cheerful neighborhood banners from summer were slowly taken down. But under that calm surface, tension still lived in every cul-de-sac, every HOA meeting, and every whispered conversation about her. Karen Whitmore, once her name had carried authority. When she spoke, people listened. When she issued a warning, homeowners complied. For nearly 10 years, she had ruled Silver Creek Estates with precision. Some called it leadership, others called it tyranny. But after the lawsuit, the restraining order, and the endless county complaints, her name now carried a different weight. Fear, embarrassment, exhaustion. The HOA board that had once stood behind her began to splinter. 2 members resigned within a month, citing irreconcilable disagreements with leadership. Homeowners started skipping meetings altogether. Even her closest allies avoided her calls. The community that she had built her identity around was quietly slipping away from her control. Ethan, meanwhile, was finally rebuilding. The restraining order had forced Karen to keep her distance, and for the first time in nearly a year, the property felt peaceful. He repaired the damage to his RV, replaced the shattered windows, and poured the foundation for his small home. The fence posts Karen had driven into his land still stood in a pile near the oak tree, rotting reminders of how far things had gone. Every morning he'd drink his coffee on the porch of his unfinished house and listen to the quiet. Sometimes he saw Karen's white SUV parked far down the street, just outside the HOA's entrance. She never crossed the line anymore. She'd just sit there for a few minutes watching. Then she'd drive off again. But as winter approached, that quiet began to feel uneasy. One Friday morning, a county zoning officer arrived unexpectedly at Ethan's gate. He looked frustrated, apologetic. He explained that the county had received another stack of complaints, anonymous, but detailed. Each one accused Ethan of environmental violations, hazardous materials, and illegal dumping. The officer sighed as he handed Ethan the reports. "They're coming from someone who really wants you gone," he said. Ethan wasn't surprised. Karen hadn't learned. Still, the county had to follow procedure. They scheduled an inspection for the following week. Ethan had nothing to hide, but he knew exactly what this was. One last attempt to make his life miserable. That weekend, the HOA held an emergency election. Word spread fast that the main topic was leadership change. Ethan didn't attend, he wasn't allowed to, but he heard from a few neighbors afterward. The meeting had been chaos. Karen had refused to step down. She'd accused the entire board of betrayal, shouting that they were letting outsiders ruin their community. But the vote was unanimous. The board had stripped her of her title as HOA president. For the first time in a decade, Karen Whitmore had lost her throne. Witnesses said she left the meeting in silence, eyes glassy, clutching her binder of community bylaws like a life raft. Her SUV sped away before anyone could speak to her. After that night, no one saw her for several days. When she returned, she wasn't the same. She began driving through the neighborhood at odd hours, circling the cul-de-sacs like she used to, but slower now, as if looking for something she couldn't find. Her once proud yard, the most perfectly trimmed in the subdivision, started to decay. The flower beds went untended, the hedges grew wild, and the pristine white fence she had forced everyone else to match started to peel. People whispered. Some said she'd been served with fines from the HOA she'd once ruled. Others said her husband had left. A few claimed she'd been seen at the county records office again, demanding that the boundary maps be re-evaluated. Ethan stayed out of it. He had no interest in revenge. He just wanted peace. But peace was something Karen could never accept. A week before the county inspection, he woke early to the sound of hammering. At first, he thought it was construction down the road. But when he stepped outside, his breath caught. Karen was back on his property. In the pale morning light, she stood by the same old fence line, hammering a wooden sign into the ground. The sign was hand-painted, the letters uneven and angry. Private HOA land. Trespassers will be removed. She looked different, disheveled, frantic. When she saw Ethan, she froze, eyes wide and wild. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, without a word, she climbed into her SUV and drove off, tires spitting gravel. The sheriff's department came out again, took another report, and reminded her of the restraining order. This time, the deputies didn't just warn her, they fined her and referred the case to the county prosecutor. For the first time, it wasn't just HOA politics or petty notices. It was criminal. That seemed to break something in her. Neighbors said she stopped leaving her house entirely after that. The once busy HOA email chain went silent. No more rules, no more patrols, no more meetings. Silver Creek Estates was finally free from her grip, but it came at a cost. A few months later, the county inspector completed the visit to Ethan's property. Everything checked out perfectly. Before leaving, the inspector handed him a copy of the final report. Attached to it was a small handwritten note from the clerk. Your parcel is officially recognized as independent residential land. The HOA has no claim or oversight. It was over. Truly over this time. Ethan framed that note and hung it inside his new house, right by the front door. Spring arrived, and with it came something that Silver Creek hadn't felt in years. Calm. Children played in the streets again. Neighbors waved from their porches. The HOA, now under new leadership, focused on actual community projects instead of crusades. For the first time since moving there, Ethan felt like he truly belonged, not as part of the HOA, but as part of the town itself. Karen's house, however, stayed empty. Weeks turned into months, and the for sale sign in her yard gathered dust. The once glossy paint of her shutters faded, and vines crept up her porch columns. It was as though the neighborhood had moved on without her, and in truth it had. No one saw her leave. One day the white SUV was there, and the next, it wasn't. A moving truck arrived quietly in the night, and by dawn, the house stood hollow and still. When Ethan walked past a few days later, he noticed something strange near the property line. Stuck in the ground, weathered and cracked, was one last wooden stake, the same kind Karen had planted months before. Faded letters were carved into the side, barely legible now. He leaned closer and read the words, "Ho boundary." He laughed softly, shaking his head. Then he pulled the stake from the earth and tossed it into the back of his truck. For the first time in a long time, the property looked truly his. No signs, no warnings, no lines drawn by someone else's hand. Just quiet land, open sky, and peace earned the hard way. Silver Creek Estates moved on, but people still told the story. About the HOA president who tried to claim land that wasn't hers. About how far control can go when pride turns into obsession. And about the man who stood his ground, not with shouting or revenge, but with patience, proof, and persistence. Ethan never saw Karen again. But every now and then, when a white SUV passed slowly on the road beyond his gate, he couldn't help but look up, just in case. And every time he smiled, because he no longer cared who was watching. The boundary was clear now, and it would stay that way forever.